Her daughter-in-law pushed her onto the subway tracks, then called it an accident. Evelyn Harris, retired schoolteacher and widow, didn't panic. She let the city EMTs lift her. She let the detectives ask questions. She let Jenna smile through her rehearsed concern. By the end of the week, Evelyn had the MTA footage, a folder of stills, and a printed transcript of a recorded confession. She'd raised a son who didn't believe her. Now she was teaching the system how to listen. And when Jenna came back to finish what she started, Evelyn was already standing at the edge, ready, watching, and unafraid. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The chill of the underground air wrapped around Evelyn Harris as she stood at the Crown Heights Utica Avenue station, one gloved hand resting on her cane, the other gripping the strap of her worn leather bag. The tiled walls reflected the flickering fluorescent lights, and somewhere down the platform, a saxophone player was wailing through "Ain't No Sunshine." Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second, feeling the vibration of an approaching train through the soles of her shoes. Jenna's voice sliced through the murmur of commuters. "You said the A train, right? Because I've got a hair appointment in 20 minutes." Evelyn turned slightly, taking in her daughter-in-law's reflection in the grimy glass of the ad panel, tall, glossy-haired, designer coat, spotless against the gray grime of the subway. Jenna didn't look up from her phone. Her manicured thumb scrolled and tapped, impatience practically radiating from her. "You can go on ahead if you're in a hurry," Evelyn said evenly. "I'll catch the next one." Jenna finally looked up, eyes cool. "Marcus said we'd go together." The train was still a distant roar in the tunnel when Evelyn shifted her weight, her hip aching from the winter damp. She focused on the yellow edge of the platform, the warning text half faded but still loud in its silence. "Stand back." The sound came first, a shuffle of boots behind her, a brief intake of breath. And then it happened. A hard shove. Sudden. Merciless. Evelyn's world flipped. Her cane clattered out of her hand as she pitched forward, the platform edge slicing the air past her shoulder. The scream caught in her throat as she hit the gravel-lined trench between the rails. Pain splintered up her wrist. The tunnel lights blurred above her like a carousel of white fire. Somewhere above, a man yelled, "Lady down! Someone help her!" The distant thunder became a scream of steel. The A train was coming. Fast. Evelyn tried to scramble to her knees, her body refusing to obey. A pair of strong hands reached down, grabbing her coat. A stranger, his face a blur, heaved her up with desperate strength. The train's horn blasted as he hauled her onto the platform just as wind and dust exploded around them. The train screamed through, inches away, a rush of metallic fury. Evelyn lay flat on the cold tiles, chest heaving, ears ringing. The world narrowed to the pounding of her heart. The stranger hovered above her, shouting something she couldn't make out. She blinked, tried to speak. Her throat burned. When her vision steadied, she saw her cane lying twisted near the tracks. A crowd had gathered, phones raised, voices overlapping. And behind them, standing frozen, was Jenna. Her daughter-in-law's phone was still in her hand. Her face was a careful mask, shock painted too neatly. Evelyn's voice cracked, barely a whisper. She did it. EMTs pushed through the crowd, voices sharp and professional. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Any head trauma? Stay still." They lifted her gently, placing her onto the stretcher. Evelyn winced as the straps tightened over her shoulder. Jenna's voice floated close, syrupy sweet. "Evelyn, I told you not to stand so close. Oh my God, are you okay?" Evelyn stared up at her, the fluorescent light haloing Jenna's silhouette. "You pushed me," she breathed, just loud enough for the paramedic beside her to glance up in confusion. They rolled her toward the elevator, sirens echoing faintly from above ground. Evelyn kept her eyes open, not out of fear, but fury. Her mind replayed the moment, the shove, the look in Jenna's eyes, again and again until the edges of her anger sharpened into something cold and precise. By the time the ambulance doors shut, she'd already decided. She wasn't going to let this disappear. At the ER, the sterile light made everything too bright. Evelyn's wrist throbbed as a nurse wrapped it tight in gauze. Machines beeped softly nearby. A man in a worn leather jacket stepped into the room, flipping open a small notepad. "Detective Ron Heller," he said. His voice had the gravelly calm of someone who'd seen too much. "Mind telling me what happened out there?" Evelyn looked him dead in the eye. "It wasn't an accident," she said, steady now. "My daughter-in-law pushed me." He paused, studying her face. "That's a serious claim, ma'am." "So is attempted murder," she said. Heller nodded slowly, pen scratching across paper. "Then we'll start there." Outside the ER window, Brooklyn's night hummed, trains roaring under the city like restless ghosts. Evelyn closed her eyes, her pulse still echoing to their rhythm. Somewhere deep inside, fear gave way to something else. Resolve. And she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The antiseptic brightness of the hospital room felt like an interrogation. Machines blinked soft green and gold at Evelyn's bedside, steady reminders that she was still alive. Something she wasn't sure Jenna had intended. Her wrist was wrapped in a cast, elevated on a pillow. Purple bruises bloomed across her thigh like storm clouds. She tested her fingers, felt the tug of pain radiate up her arm, and exhaled slowly. The world outside the window was all gray drizzle and city hum. Every so often, a siren yowled somewhere in the distance. Brooklyn never stopped moving, even when she did. The door creaked open. "Mom," Marcus said gently, stepping inside first. His face was pale and lined with worry, his tie still askew from whatever frantic call had pulled him out of work. Behind him came Jenna, heels clicking softly on the linoleum, perfume cutting through the sterile air. "Oh, Evelyn," Jenna sighed, clutching a bouquet of white roses too perfect to be sincere. "You scared us half to death." Evelyn's gaze shifted to Marcus. He looked exhausted, torn. "How are you feeling?" he asked, voice small, searching. "I'll live," she said, her tone even. Jenna moved closer to the bed, setting the flowers down beside the tray table with exaggerated care. "The doctor said you were lucky. You really shouldn't stand so close to the edge, especially with that cane. The platform was slick. I almost slipped myself." Evelyn's eyes flicked up. "Is that so?" Jenna's smile tightened. "Accidents happen. I told the officer the same thing. You tripped, right?" The monitor beside Evelyn beeped faster for a beat. She didn't answer. She just stared, long enough for Jenna's polished veneer to tremble at the edges. Marcus cleared his throat, trying to bridge the silence. "Mom, the detective said they might review camera footage from the station. Maybe it'll clear everything up." Evelyn nodded slightly, eyes never leaving Jenna. "Yes," she said quietly. "Maybe it will." For the briefest moment, Jenna's jaw flexed before she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well," she murmured, backing away a step, "you just focus on getting better. We'll check in later tonight." Marcus lingered as Jenna moved toward the door. He looked torn between duty and denial. "Try to rest, okay?" he said softly. When the door closed, Evelyn finally allowed herself to breathe. The air seemed heavier now, scented faintly with roses and deceit. She shifted on the bed, pain biting through her side. Her fingers brushed the call button, and moments later a nurse appeared, a young woman with tired eyes and a kind smile. "Need something, Ms. Harris?" "Yes," Evelyn said, lowering her voice. "Is there a way to request subway surveillance footage? From the MTA?" The nurse paused, glancing at her wrist chart. From the accident? Evelyn nodded. It wasn't an accident. The nurse hesitated, her expression softening. Ma'am, you're not the first one down there to say that. Evelyn frowned. Meaning what? Meaning, the nurse said quietly, adjusting the blanket. Those platforms see more accidents than anyone wants to admit. But if you want that footage, tell your detective before the MTA archives it. They don't keep things long. Evelyn absorbed that, her heartbeat picking up. Thank you, she said. The nurse offered a sympathetic look. You rest now. And don't let anyone make you second-guess what you know. When the door closed again, Evelyn turned her head toward the roses on the table. Perfect white petals. Not a bruise among them. She reached for one, plucked it from the bunch, and let it drop into the waste bin. Her eyes settled on the clock, 8:47 p.m. The same time, she realized, that the A train had roared through the station the night before. She thought of the stranger's hands pulling her up, of Jenna's stillness in that moment, of the way the crowd's gasps had mixed with the screech of metal. Her fingers tightened on the bed rail. They could call it a fall. They could call it confusion, trauma, anything they wanted. But she knew the truth. And the truth didn't shake her. It anchored her. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. Evelyn turned her head toward the window, her reflection ghosting back at her in the glass. Tired, pale, but unbroken. Let her think I'm fragile, she thought. Let her think I'll stay quiet. Then she reached for the nurse's call button again. Could you send Detective Heller in when he's back? She asked. The nurse nodded, puzzled. Of course. You okay? Evelyn smiled faintly. Better than she thinks. And for the first time since the tracks, a spark of satisfaction flickered behind her eyes. Sharp, steady, and waiting. Because now, Evelyn Harris wasn't just a victim. She was a witness. The apartment was quieter than Evelyn remembered. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space where laughter and arguments used to live. She'd been home less than an hour, still stiff from the hospital discharge, her wrist aching every time she moved, but she couldn't rest. Not yet. The yellow folder Detective Heller had left on her kitchen counter waited like a loaded weapon. Inside was a USB drive labeled in blue ink, MTA footage, 10/17/25, Crown Heights, Utica. Evelyn set her tea aside, powered up her old laptop, and slipped the drive into the port. The screen flickered, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat before the file opened. The first few seconds were mundane, commuters pacing, teenagers laughing, a busker tuning his guitar. Evelyn's own figure appeared near the edge of the frame, small, upright, cane tapping steadily, coat buttoned to her throat. Behind her, Jenna scrolled through her phone, that same coat she'd worn to the hospital gleaming under the platform lights. Evelyn leaned closer. Her pulse climbed. The timestamp rolled. 8:46:02. She watched herself shift her weight, her cane tapping once. Jenna looked up. 8:46:05. Jenna took one step forward. 8:46:07. The shove, sharp, deliberate, unmistakable. Evelyn's body lurched forward, arms flailing as she dropped out of frame. Evelyn's breath caught. Her hand trembled over the mouse. She hit rewind, replayed it. Once, twice, again. Each time, the movement was undeniable. No bump, no stumble, just intent. Cold and quick. Evelyn's jaw tightened. The tremor in her hand steadied. She paused the frame mid-motion, Jenna's palm flat against her shoulder, her face half-turned, almost serene. The freeze frame felt colder than any hospital room. She hit print screen. Then again. And again. 6 stills. Each more damning than the last. The printer whirred in the corner, spitting out evidence that no one could twist or sugarcoat. When the final page slid out, Evelyn gathered the warm papers, her casted wrist throbbing. She slipped them into the yellow folder, her movements slow but deliberate. Her reflection caught in the kitchen window. Gray hair disheveled, eyes alert, alive with purpose. For the first time in days, she smiled, not out of joy, but out of certainty. She reached for the phone. Detective Heller answered on the second ring, his gravelly voice steady as always. Heller. "It's Evelyn Harris," she said, each syllable clear. "You need to see something." There was a pause. "Is this about the footage?" "Yes," she said, "and it's not open for debate." 10 minutes later, she heard the knock. When she opened the door, Heller stood there, coat damp from the drizzle, the smell of wet asphalt clinging to him. He stepped inside, shaking off the rain. "You shouldn't be moving around yet," he said, but his tone carried more respect than reprimand. Evelyn slid the folder toward him on the kitchen table. "It's all there. I watched it twice." Heller flipped through the prints, his brow furrowing deeper with each one. "Well," he muttered finally, "I'll be damned." Evelyn folded her arms. "You believe me now?" He nodded once. "This isn't just probable cause, it's a slam dunk." "Then what happens next?" "I'll get it over to the DA's office. Ada Carla Reyes will handle it from here. She's one of the sharp ones." Evelyn exhaled, tension easing just slightly. "Good. I'm tired of being treated like a confused old woman." Heller's eyes softened. "You're not confused. You're dangerous when you've got proof." He tucked the folder under his arm and moved toward the door. "I'll call you once Reyes reviews it." As the door shut behind him, Evelyn sank into her armchair, the same one she'd graded papers in for 30 years. The rain outside thickened into a steady rhythm against the glass, and somewhere down the block, a siren wailed. Her tea had gone cold. She didn't care. Evelyn's mind replayed the moment from the footage. Jenna's hand, that calculated step forward, the calm after the act. She thought about Marcus, about what it would do to him to see the truth so plain, but sympathy, for now, had no place here. Her phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have watched that." Evelyn froze. The text vanished a moment later, deleted from the thread. She stared at the blank screen, pulse thrumming, fear and fury colliding in her chest. Then she whispered to herself, voice low and unshaken, "Too late." And for the first time since the fall, Evelyn Harris knew exactly what direction she was headed. Forward, into the fight. The district attorney's office in downtown Brooklyn wasn't built for comfort. Everything about it, from the flickering fluorescent lights to the echo of shoes against linoleum, spoke of bureaucracy and battles fought behind closed doors. Evelyn sat upright in the narrow chair across from Assistant District Attorney Carla Reyes, a woman with composed eyes and a voice that cut clean through pretense. The yellow folder sat between them like a loaded trap. Heller had already briefed her, but Reyes wanted to hear everything firsthand. "Start from the beginning," she said, clicking her pen open. "Your words, Ms. Harris." Evelyn drew in a breath. "My daughter-in-law pushed me in front of the A train." Reyes didn't flinch. "And you're certain?" "More certain than I've ever been about anything." Evelyn's wrist throbbed, but she ignored it, describing every detail: the station's smell of grease and metal, Jenna's tone that morning, the shove, the stranger's hands pulling her out of the pit. When she spoke of the MTA footage, Reyes leaned forward, the faintest spark of satisfaction crossing her face. "I've reviewed it," Reyes said. "There's no ambiguity. This isn't going away quietly." Evelyn's lips tightened. "Good." The ADA flipped open a legal pad, jotting notes in swift strokes. "We'll need your hospital records to confirm the injuries align with a fall consistent with that footage. I've also requested eyewitness statements from the commuters on the platform. 2 already confirmed seeing a woman in a beige coat push another toward the tracks. That helps." Evelyn watched her write, a quiet admiration forming behind her composure. Carla Reyes didn't waste words. She wasn't performing empathy. She was executing precision. When can we move forward? Evelyn asked. Reyes glanced up. Soon. But I don't want this case to collapse under noise. We'll build it right, piece by piece. The phrase settled deep in Evelyn's chest, steadying, almost comforting. By the time she left the office, the sky had cleared into that bright, brittle blue that follows a storm. The city sounded different now. Less like chaos. More like purpose. She took a cab home, the motion jostling her sore hip, but she welcomed the ache. It kept her awake. Back in her apartment, she brewed fresh coffee, trying to outrun the fatigue. When she sat at her kitchen table, her laptop chimed. A new notification. Jenna Harris had posted on social media. Evelyn hesitated, then clicked. The photo filled the screen. Jenna and Marcus smiling at a restaurant table, wine glasses raised, candlelight soft on their faces. The caption read, "So thankful she's okay. Family. Means everything, hashad grateful, kashos strong together." Evelyn stared at it for a long time. The smile on Jenna's face was identical to the one she'd worn at the hospital. Too wide, too rehearsed. Marcus's arm was around her shoulders, but his eyes looked somewhere else, unfocused, weary. She pressed print. The page slid out of the printer, the ink still wet when she added it to her growing evidence folder, just beneath the MTA stills, the hypocrisy, immortalized in color. The next morning, she stopped by Mel's Deli on her corner. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, the smell of coffee and pastrami wrapping around her like home. Mel looked up from behind the counter. "Well, look who's back. I read about what happened, Evelyn. Jesus, that's some hell." She smiled faintly. "I've had better weeks." He poured her a cup of coffee, on the house of course, and leaned on the counter. "So, they gonna charge her?" "Soon," she said. "The ADA's on it." Mel snorted, shaking his head. "That woman's poison in heels. I saw her once in here, talking to you like you were an inconvenience. I knew then. Something wasn't right about her." Evelyn met his eyes, warmth creeping through the steel of her composure. "You always did have good instincts." He shrugged. "I just don't like bullies, sweetheart. Never have." When she left, the folder was tucked firmly under her arm, heavier now, but so was her resolve. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed. A new message. Detective Heller. Heller. "Reyes has everything. She's drafting charges. You did good, Ms. Harris." Evelyn allowed herself a small exhale. Then another buzz followed. "Reyes. We'll build this the right way. But once it starts, there's no going back." Evelyn typed a simple reply. "I never planned to." She set her phone down, glanced toward the window. Across the street, a reflection flickered in the glass of a parked car. Someone standing, watching. Or maybe it was just her imagination, feeding off adrenaline and exhaustion. Either way, she didn't move. She just watched back, unblinking. Because now, the case wasn't just moving forward. It was hers to see through. And if Jenna thought she could outmaneuver her, she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The cafe on Franklin Avenue was the kind of place that pretended not to notice anyone. Steam fogged the front windows, and the smell of burnt espresso hung heavy in the air. Evelyn chose a booth near the back, her cane leaning against the vinyl seat, her phone angled slightly under the table. Recording, screen dimmed. Jenna was late. Of course she was. Evelyn stirred her coffee, steadying her hand. The clink of the spoon against ceramic sounded louder than it should have. When Jenna finally walked in, heads turned. She had that effect. Sunglasses too large for her face, lips glossed, posture perfect. A woman rehearsing normalcy. "Evelyn," she said, sliding into the booth with a tight smile. "Thanks for meeting me." Evelyn's eyes didn't soften. "You insisted." I just thought. Jenna adjusted her napkin, lowering her voice. Maybe we could talk before this gets uglier than it already is. Evelyn raised a brow. Before what gets uglier? Jenna leaned forward, voice honeyed with false remorse. The DA, the detectives, the gossip. Marcus can barely sleep. I didn't mean for things to spiral like this. Evelyn sipped her coffee. You didn't mean for me to survive? Jenna froze just for a moment. Then she gave a small laugh. Too light, too calculated. Oh, come on, you tripped, Evelyn. I was right there. Evelyn didn't blink. I saw the footage. Jenna's smile faltered. What footage? The one where your hand finds my shoulder. Evelyn's voice was calm, almost gentle. It's hard to mistake intent when you slow it down. For the first time, Jenna's mask cracked. Her nails tapped against the table in quick, sharp beats. You shouldn't have looked at that. Shouldn't I? Jenna's jaw tightened, then she laughed again, a brittle sound. You've always loved your little power games. Marcus told me how you used to check our mail, question our spending, meddle in everything. You just can't stand not being in control, can you? Evelyn leaned in, her voice low. I was never trying to control you, Jenna. I was trying to protect my son. That landed. Jenna's eyes flashed, and for a split second she forgot to perform. Her tone sharpened. Protect him? From what, me? He's mine, Evelyn, not yours. Maybe it's time you understood that. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. I think I do now. The silence between them grew dense, broken only by the hiss of the espresso machine. Evelyn could hear her own pulse in her ears. Then Jenna smirked, leaning back, her voice barely above a whisper. You're lucky I didn't push harder. The words hung in the air like a dropped match. Evelyn's breath caught, but her face didn't move. She simply nodded once, with quiet precision. Thank you for confirming. The meaning hit Jenna half a second too late. Her eyes darted to the phone in Evelyn's hand, half hidden beneath the table napkin. You... Evelyn smiled, serene and final. You might want to finish your latte before the police do. Jenna stood abruptly, knocking her chair against the tile. The cafe went silent for a beat. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out, the bell over the door shrieking her exit. Evelyn stayed seated for a full minute, letting her heartbeat settle. Then she stopped the recording, checked that it had captured everything, including that fatal sentence, and slipped the phone into her coat pocket. Outside, the air was sharp with late autumn chill. She dialed Adia Reyes. I have something you'll want to hear, she said. By evening, the sky had turned, bruise purple over Brooklyn. Evelyn was at home when the call came. Mrs. Harris, Reyes said, her voice crisp but tinged with disbelief. We got the recording. It's airtight, she confessed. Evelyn closed her eyes. Good. Units are on their way to make the arrest. You just bought yourself justice. But Evelyn didn't celebrate. She just stared out the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. An hour later, her phone buzzed again, this time from Marcus. They arrested her. His voice cracked through the static. Mom, what did you do? Evelyn swallowed. I told the truth. There was silence. Then a single, quiet breath before he hung up. She didn't move for a long while. The city hummed beneath her feet, indifferent and alive. Then, a knock. Sharp. Rhythmic. When she opened the door, an envelope rested on her welcome mat. Her name was printed neatly across the front in legal black font. Subpoena. Inside, the words blurred for a moment before settling into focus. Jenna Harris, Far, Evelyn Harris, civil complaint, elder abuse. Evelyn stared at it, the edges of her fury cooling into something colder, steadier. The game had shifted. Again. She folded the subpoena once, twice, slid it into the folder beside Jenna's confession, and whispered to herself, So that's how you want to play. Outside, a siren wailed down Eastern Parkway, and Evelyn Harris smiled for the first time all day, not because she was winning, but because the war had officially begun. The courthouse letterhead was starting to feel like wallpaper in Evelyn's life. Another envelope, another accusation, another desperate move from Jenna Harris. The new complaint arrived on a Tuesday morning. Gray skies pressed low over Brooklyn, the city still slick from overnight rain. Evelyn stood at her kitchen counter, glasses low on her nose, reading the pages line by line. Emotional manipulation, harassment, verbal intimidation. The list went on like a grotesque parody. By the second page, Evelyn's hands had stopped trembling. Now they were steady, cold. She set the papers down, opened her laptop, and began compiling everything: dates, screenshots, photos. Every text Jenna had ever sent her that crossed the line between snide and cruel. Every clipped voicemail where her voice curdled with resentment. The printed selfie from that "thankful she's okay" post went right on top. And at the very end, she slid in the flash drive with the cafe recording, the one that had already destroyed Jenna's denials. By the time she zipped the folder shut, her table looked like a war room. Detective Heller met her at the DA's office that afternoon, coffee in hand and a smirk that passed for sympathy. "She's doubling down," he said. "Some people can't tell when they're already sinking." Evelyn followed him into Adia Carla Reyes's office. The walls were lined with legal pads, pinned documents, and a single framed quote: "Truth doesn't need to shout." Reyes looked up from her desk, already aware. Her attorneys filed the countersuit, she said. Elder abuse, harassment, intimidation, the works. It's a Hail Mary. Evelyn dropped the folder on her desk. "Then catch it." Reyes opened it, flipping through the stack. The photos, the texts, the screenshots, all neatly labeled and cross-dated. When she reached the transcript of the cafe recording, her lips curved into something halfway between amusement and admiration. "You're lucky I didn't push harder," she read aloud softly. "She really said that?" "She did," Evelyn replied, "and she knew I was recording." Reyes exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "This woman's building her own coffin." Heller snorted. "Yeah, and she brought her own shovel." For the first time all week, Evelyn laughed, a dry, quiet sound that startled even her. "I just want her lies in the ground with her." Reyes met her eyes. "They will be. I'll file a motion to dismiss the countersuit." "But Evelyn, be ready. People like Jenna don't go down with dignity." "I'm not counting on it." When Evelyn stepped back out into the hallway, the winter light poured through the tall courthouse windows, pale and unfeeling. She adjusted her scarf, feeling the old ache flare in her hip as she walked. But there was a new steadiness in her steps, momentum that pain couldn't slow. By the time she got home that evening, the city had sunk into its usual neon pulse. A voicemail blinked on her landline. "Marcus." She pressed play. "Mom, can we talk?" His voice was small, uncertain. "Just, please don't hang up if I come by." She didn't. He arrived half an hour later, face drawn, jacket still damp from rain. He looked more like the boy she'd raised than the man Jenna had shaped. When he stepped into the apartment, the first thing he saw was the stack of folders on the table. "They said you're suing her?" he asked quietly. "I'm defending myself," Evelyn said. "From her lies." Marcus rubbed his forehead. "She's saying you've been harassing her for years, that you showed up at our apartment uninvited, that you—" "Marcus," she interrupted, voice soft but firm. "Sit down." He did, slowly. Evelyn opened the folder, laying out the evidence with the precision of a teacher grading a test. The photo of Jenna's smug smile. The text messages where she mocked Evelyn's fall. The stills from the subway footage. And finally, the printed transcript. Jenna's own words. bold and damning. Marcus stared at the page. His jaw worked soundlessly, emotion flickering behind his eyes. Disbelief, shame, maybe both. This can't be real, he whispered. It's all real, Evelyn said. And I didn't bring it to you to hurt you. I brought it to remind you who she really is. He didn't look up. His shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. After a long silence, he pushed the papers back toward her. I don't know what to believe anymore, he said. You just did, Evelyn replied. Marcus stood abruptly, eyes glassy, torn in two directions. For a second, he looked like he wanted to say something, an apology, maybe, but instead, he just shook his head. I can't do this right now. The door closed behind him, leaving only the hum of the radiator and the faint creak of the old apartment. Evelyn sat for a long moment, staring at the door he'd just walked through. She felt the ache in her hip, the throb in her wrist, but beneath it all, a strange calm. She looked toward the window, the reflection of the city lights dancing across her evidence folder. The war wasn't over, not even close, but the truth was on her side, and truth had patience. Then her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. The text read, "You think the law will save you?" Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin, defiant smile. She typed back 3 words. It already did. And she hit send. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and nerves. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an almost clinical glare across rows of wooden benches. Evelyn Harris sat in the second row, hands clasped around her cane, her eyes fixed on the front. Beside her, Betty Collins, the sharp-tongued neighbor who'd insisted on coming, leaned in and whispered, "She's late. Of course she's late. Women like her always make an entrance." Evelyn's lips twitched, but she said nothing. Her focus was on the defense table, empty for now, but soon to hold the woman who'd nearly taken her life. The double doors opened. Jenna walked in wearing a cream suit and pearls, her expression cool as marble. Her hair was perfectly arranged, her steps measured, her confidence so carefully constructed it looked rehearsed. The smirk that crept across her lips as she approached the table wasn't one of apology. It was ownership, as though the courtroom itself were another stage she intended to dominate. Marcus trailed a few steps behind, his eyes downcast. He didn't sit with her, but he didn't sit with Evelyn either. He chose a corner bench near the aisle, halfway between loyalties and nowhere at all. When Jenna finally took her seat beside her attorney, a polished man in a $1,000 suit, she didn't look toward Evelyn. Not once. The clerk's voice rang out. Docket number 3482, The People versus Jenna Harris, charged with attempted murder in the 2nd degree. The murmur that followed was a living thing. Reporters shifted in their seats, pens scratching. Even the judge lifted an eyebrow. The defense attorney rose. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. Evelyn heard Betty suck in a breath beside her, muttering under it, Not guilty, my ass. The judge silenced the room with a single glance. Ada Carla Reyes stood slowly, her posture unyielding. The people are prepared to proceed with evidence demonstrating clear intent and premeditation. Jenna's attorney smirked. Intent? My client is a devoted wife and caregiver to her mother-in-law. This entire case rests on the confused recollection of a traumatized retiree who has, by her own admission, suffered from dizziness and impaired balance. The words were smooth, sharp, designed to cut. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her cane until her knuckles whitened. The defense continued, voice echoing off the marble walls. The alleged shove is nothing more than a tragic misstep, an unfortunate accident that Mrs. Harris's grief and paranoia have twisted into a false accusation. This woman, he said, pointing toward Evelyn, is suffering from psychological aftershock and misplaced guilt. A low rustle swept through the courtroom. Betty muttered, "If I could throw my purse at him, I would." Reyes didn't respond to the insult. She waited, then said simply, "Your Honor, the people would like to present Exhibit A, security footage provided by the Metropolitan Transit Authority." The lights dimmed slightly as a screen descended from the ceiling. The murmur died into silence. The footage began, grainy, monochrome. The platform, the train's approach. Evelyn's figure, small but steady. Jenna, standing behind her, scrolling her phone. For a few seconds, the courtroom was nothing but the faint hum of the projector. Then, the shove. Evelyn's body pitched forward, the frame cutting off as the crowd on the video lurched in panic. Gasps rippled through the gallery, sharp as broken glass. The footage rewound. Played again. Slower. This time, everyone saw it. The subtle lean forward, the deliberate push, the cold stillness that followed. One of the jurors whispered something that drew an immediate glare from the judge. Jenna's attorney's face drained of color. Across the aisle, Jenna sat perfectly still, her chin raised, jaw tight. But a twitch betrayed her composure, the slightest tremor at the corner of her mouth. Reyes let the silence hang before she spoke. "The people rest, Your Honor." The judge cleared his throat. "We'll reconvene for preliminary motions this Friday. Until then, the defendant is remanded under supervision." The gavel came down, and it was over, at least for the day. Reporters surged toward the aisle, shouting questions as the bailiff barked for order. Evelyn remained seated, unmoving. Only when Betty touched her arm did she blink back to the present. "You all right?" Betty asked softly. Evelyn nodded. "Better than she is?" They stood, and as Evelyn turned toward the exit, her gaze caught Marcus's across the room. He looked at her for the first time all day, eyes full of something she couldn't name. Guilt, maybe? Or awakening. He didn't speak. He just nodded once before slipping out the side door. Outside, the winter sun was pale and thin, filtering through courthouse glass like diluted gold. Evelyn stepped into it, her pulse slow but certain. Behind her, the courthouse doors clanged shut. Ahead, the street was crawling with cameras. As she crossed toward the waiting cab, her phone buzzed again. A message. Unknown number. "You made your move. My turn now." Evelyn stopped on the courthouse steps, cold air slicing her breath short. She stared at the message for a long time, then whispered to herself, "Then let's see how well you play under oath." And with that, she slipped the phone into her coat pocket, face unreadable, spine unbent, as the war rolled into its next act. The next morning, Brooklyn woke to Jenna Harris's face plastered across every screen. Local news anchors spoke her name with the rehearsed neutrality reserved for small-time scandals. Brooklyn woman charged with attempted murder of her mother-in-law. Her mugshot was everywhere, hair pulled back, pearls gone, confidence stripped down to a hollow stare. Evelyn watched the segment from her kitchen, her cane propped against the counter, her coffee untouched. The anchor's voice droned on. "Sources say the case will proceed to trial after the DA's office confirmed video evidence and an audio confession." The photo cut to a still of the subway platform, the moment before the shove. Evelyn turned off the TV. She didn't need to see it again. Her phone buzzed once, a new voicemail notification. She didn't have to guess who it was. Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker. "Mom. I just..." She called again. "From Rikers. I didn't pick up. I can't." His breath hitched, like a confession he didn't want to finish. "I keep seeing that footage. I thought I knew her." Evelyn closed her eyes. "You do now," she whispered to the empty room. By afternoon, the city felt less sharp around the edges. Betty's old sedan coughed its way down Flatbush Avenue, heater blowing air that smelled faintly of peppermint and dust. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, her leg brace visible beneath her slacks. "You sure you're up for this?" Betty asked, checking her mirrors like a hawk. "I've been sitting long enough." Evelyn adjusted her scarf. "Time to move. Physical therapy's no joke, hun. They'll have you bending and stretching like a gymnast." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Good. I've got something to work toward." The rehab wing at Kings County Hospital was bright and sterile, full of determination and pain. Evelyn gritted through every motion, the lifts, the bends, the balancing drills, her jaw locked but her focus unwavering. Every ache was a reminder that she'd survived, and that survival had to mean something. When they were done, Betty helped her back to the car, grumbling about parking meters and hospital coffee. Evelyn caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, sweat at her temples, lines etched deeper around her mouth. She didn't mind. This was what rebuilding looked like. Later that week, she stopped by Mel's deli, cane tapping against the tile as the bell over the door jingled. Mel looked up from the slicer, face lighting up when he saw her. "Well, if it isn't Brooklyn's toughest customer," he said. "Heard you're walking without that chair now." Evelyn nodded. Slowly, but it counts. Mel reached under the counter and pulled out a small gift bag. "Got something for you." Inside was a white ceramic mug, the word "Survivor" stretched across it in bold navy letters. Evelyn laughed, a short, genuine sound she hadn't made in weeks. "That obvious, huh? You earned it," Mel said, leaning on the counter. "Not everyone gets pushed in front of a train and lives to see their attacker's mug shot on Channel 7. She took the mug carefully, fingers tracing the smooth glaze. "Thank you, Mel." "Don't thank me, Ev. Just promise you'll drink something stronger than tea out of it one day." 2 days later, Ada Carla Reyes called. Evelyn sat on the edge of her couch, the Survivor mug in her hand. "The DA's office is officially setting trial," Reyes said. 2 months from now. The judge moved quickly, given the evidence. Jenna's attorney's scrambling, but she's running out of rope. Evelyn's pulse quickened. "So it's happening." "It's happening," Reyes confirmed. "You'll be our first witness, and Evelyn, your testimony's what holds the whole thing together. You ready for that?" Evelyn glanced at her cane, the faded scars along her wrist, the folder on her table that had once felt like her only weapon. "I've been ready," she said. That weekend, she stood behind a podium at a small community center for a transit safety event. Cameras flashed. A modest crowd filled the rows of folding chairs. Neighbors, commuters, a few reporters chasing a headline. Betty sat in the front row, beaming like she was at her granddaughter's graduation. Evelyn spoke softly at first, the microphone picking up the faint rasp in her voice. "Accidents happen," she began. "But what happened to me wasn't an accident, and it took me nearly losing my life to realize how many people go unheard when things like this happen." A hush fell over the room. Evelyn steadied her breath, her voice growing firmer. "The footage saved me, but not everyone gets proof. So today, I'm not here as a victim. I'm here as someone who's going to make sure our city listens." Applause erupted, and for once, she let herself absorb it, not as validation, but as fuel. Reyes was waiting for her afterward near the doors, hands tucked into her blazer pockets. "You handled that like a pro," she said. "I was a teacher for 30 years, Evelyn replied. "I know how to make people pay attention." Reyes smiled. "You'll do fine on the stand." As the crowd filed out, Evelyn caught a flicker of movement near the back exit, a shadow slipping away, too quickly to place. Her stomach tightened. When she turned back, Betty was waving from across the room, holding up her phone. "Smile, honey. I'm sending this one to the Brooklyn Herald." Evelyn smiled for the picture, though her thoughts had already drifted elsewhere. That night, when she got home, she found a single envelope slipped under her apartment door. No name, no return address. Inside was a torn newspaper clipping, Jenna's mugshot, circled in red ink. Beneath it, in block letters, "She's not done." Evelyn's hand stilled, heart pounding in the silence of her apartment. She looked toward the survivor mug on her table. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Neither am I." The district attorney's office was quieter than usual that morning, its hallways humming with the low murmur of printers and the scratch of pens on paper. Evelyn sat in the corner of Adia Carla Reyes's office, her cane leaning against the wall beside her, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Across from Reyes sat Marcus, pale, trembling, eyes rimmed red as though he hadn't slept in days. He'd called the night before, his voice breaking on the words, "I need to make this right." Now he was here, and Evelyn could barely look at him without seeing both the boy she'd raised and the man he'd become, someone broken open by truth. Reyes folded her hands, patient but firm. "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Harris." Marcus swallowed hard, glancing once at his mother before speaking. "It started long before the subway," he said quietly. "Jenna, she didn't like when Mom came by. She said she meddled too much, but it wasn't true. Mom just—" He hesitated, voice cracking. "She just cared." Evelyn's chest tightened, but she stayed silent. Marcus stared down at his hands. "It got worse after we got married. Jenna would make these little comments. Jokes at first. 'Your mother's spying again,' or 'she's jealous of us.' But then it got meaner. She'd say things like Mom was trying to control me, that I needed to choose." Reyes scribbled notes, her face unreadable. "She'd make me block Mom's calls," Marcus continued. "Hide invitations to family dinners. She told our friends Mom had early dementia, said she imagined things that weren't there." His voice trembled. "And I believed her. God help me, I believed her." Evelyn looked down at her knees. Her throat burned, but she didn't interrupt. "Did she ever threaten your mother directly?" Reyes asked. Marcus nodded, a tear cutting down his cheek. "Once. Last Christmas. I heard her on the phone when she thought I was asleep. She said, 'If she doesn't back off, I'll handle it my way.'" The room fell silent except for the faint buzz of the fluorescent light overhead. Reyes leaned forward. "Did you tell anyone?" "No," Marcus whispered. "I told myself I'd imagined it, because if I didn't, I'd have to admit I married someone capable of this." He lifted his eyes to Evelyn then, raw, pleading. "Mom, I'm so sorry for not believing you, for not—" She shook her head gently. "You don't have to apologize, Marcus. You just have to tell the truth." He nodded, wiping his face. "I'm done lying. I want her to pay for everything." Reyes stood, her expression softening for just a second. "Your statement will help us add a new charge: witness tampering. The fact that she tried to isolate and intimidate Evelyn makes her pattern clear." Marcus took a shaky breath. "Good." When the meeting ended, he lingered in the doorway as Evelyn collected her things. For a moment, he looked like he might hug her, but instead, he just said, "Can I stay with you for a while? Just until all this is over?" Evelyn hesitated. Then she nodded. "Of course, Marcus. It's still your home." That night, the apartment felt both familiar and strange. Marcus unpacked a small duffel bag into the guest room, the one that had once been his as a boy. He moved quietly, trying to take up less space than he did. In the morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of clattering in the kitchen. For a fleeting moment, she thought it was Betty again, bringing her coffee. But when she limped down the hall, she stopped short. Marcus stood at the stove, still in his dress shirt from yesterday, sleeves rolled up, hair a mess. Pancakes sizzled in the pan. "I burned the first batch," he said, embarrassed. "But I figured you deserved breakfast you didn't have to microwave." Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. "I can't remember the last time you cooked for me." Probably college, he said, and that ended in smoke alarms. She chuckled softly, the sound filling the kitchen in a way that felt almost like peace. For a few quiet minutes they ate together, no accusations, no ghosts between them. Just mother and son, reclaiming something small and real. That evening, after Marcus left for a walk, Evelyn tidied the apartment. She gathered dishes, folded throw blankets, straightened the folder of case notes on her table. When she reached the door to set the chain, she noticed something lying on the floor. Thin, white, half tucked under the frame. Her stomach dropped before she even bent to pick it up. A note, folded once, no envelope. She opened it slowly. 4 words, block letters, written in what looked like black marker. You'll be next. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears. The handwriting wasn't Jenna's, too heavy, too jagged, but that almost made it worse. Her gaze darted to the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty. Only the hum of the radiator and the faint clatter of pipes filled the silence. She locked the door. Every bolt, every chain. Then she set the note beside her evidence folder and stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, until resolve overtook the fear. She reached for her phone and called Reyes. When the ADA answered, Evelyn's voice was steady. "Someone's still trying to scare me," she said, "but it's going to take a hell of a lot more than paper to stop me now." She hung up, turned off the lights, and sat near the window, awake, unblinking, while the city roared quietly below her. Because Evelyn Harris wasn't waiting for justice anymore. She was preparing for war. By the time Evelyn reached the DA's office the next morning, the city was gray and restless, a low drizzle streaking down the windows of the Crown Heights cab. She carried the note inside a clear plastic sleeve, tucked between her statement papers like a silent witness. Ada Carla Reyes met her in the conference room, already on her second coffee, her blazer immaculate despite the weather. "You said someone left it under your door?" she asked. Evelyn nodded, sliding the sleeve across the table. "Late last night. I didn't see who." Reyes leaned over the note, eyes narrowing at the black block letters. "You'll be next." The words looked angry even in stillness, the marker strokes pressed hard enough to bleed through the page. Reyes didn't speak for a long moment. Then she exhaled. "You did the right thing bringing it in." Detective Heller stepped into the room mid-conversation, his raincoat dripping onto the tile. "Morning, ladies," he said, voice gravelly as ever. "Heard you've got fan mail." Evelyn managed a thin smile. "If that's what we're calling it." Heller picked up the sleeve, squinting. "I'll get it over to handwriting analysis. If it matches Jenna, we've got her on another charge, intimidation of a witness. And if it's someone else..." He shrugged. "We'll find out soon enough." Evelyn crossed her arms. "You think she had help?" Heller didn't answer, which said enough. 2 days later, the results came back. Reyes called her directly, voice low but tight with vindication. "It's her handwriting," she said. The pressure points matched the letters from her prior filings. The E's and T's, identical. Evelyn sank back in her chair, the mix of disbelief and fury washing through her. "She's in custody, Carla. How could she..." Reyes cut in. "We traced the envelope to a correctional visitor's mail drop. Someone smuggled it out for her. She's still trying to get to you, even from inside." Evelyn stared out the window, the Brooklyn skyline smudged by fog. "Then add it to the list. Make her answer for all of it." "I already did," Reyes said. "A new charge, witness intimidation, Class E felony. The judge won't like it. And when the jury hears it, they'll see who she really is." For the first time in days, Evelyn allowed herself a breath that didn't shake. "Good." That afternoon, Betty showed up at her door, holding a cardboard box like it contained state secrets. "What's that?" Evelyn asked, letting her in. "Security," Betty said briskly, brushing raindrops off her coat. "You're not sleeping with threats sliding under your door. Mel helped me pick this up from the hardware store." Inside the box was a small door camera, motion-activated with a blue LED light. "I can install it myself," Betty said, setting it down beside Evelyn's shoes. "Or rather, you'll hand me the screwdriver, and I'll do the installing." Evelyn tried to protest, but Betty was already halfway to the entryway. "I've lived through 3 burglaries, 1 blackout, and a blackout during a burglary," she muttered. "This little eye's not scaring me." When they finished, the device blinked to life, a soft blue pulse against the hallway shadows. Evelyn stared at it, a strange comfort blooming in her chest. "Now if anyone tries to mess with you again," Betty said, dusting her hands, "we'll have their face in full HD." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You always did have good timing," Betty winked. "I'm not letting some spoiled sociopath ruin my neighbor's peace. Now, let's get you ready for that City Hall thing." City Hall was buzzing that evening, every seat filled for the Transit Safety Forum. The press lined the back, cameras poised, flashbulbs glinting off the polished marble. Evelyn stood near the stage, cane in one hand, her notes in the other. Reyes had encouraged her to speak. "You've become the face of this case," she'd said. "Own it." When Evelyn stepped up to the microphone, the room quieted. She looked out over the faces, commuters, officials, strangers, and felt none of the tremor that had once defined her. "I was pushed," she began simply, "but I wasn't broken." The murmurs died. "For months, people told me to let it go, to heal quietly, but silence never protects the innocent. It only comforts the guilty. Every bruise I had, every scar that healed, reminded me that fear only wins if you stop standing up." A quiet ripple of applause began, swelling slowly. Evelyn paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. "Brooklyn's strong," she said. "But strength means nothing if we look away from danger. So I'll keep fighting. For safer platforms, for accountability, for justice. Because I'm not done yet." The applause exploded, echoing through the chamber. Reyes stood in the back, arms crossed, a proud half-smile on her face. Evelyn stepped down from the podium, heart pounding, not from fear, but from power reclaimed. Outside, flashes went off as reporters called her name. Betty squeezed her hand. "You did it, Ev. You got their attention." Evelyn smiled. Now they'll never forget it. That night, as she returned home, the hallway was quiet except for the hum of the door camera blinking its steady blue light. She checked the feed. Empty. For the first time in weeks, she let herself believe she might finally sleep. But just as she turned to lock up, the camera pinged. Motion detected. She froze. The screen on her phone flickered to life, showing a grainy figure standing outside her door. Face obscured, body still. Then, just as quickly, the feed cut to black. Evelyn's hand tightened on her cane. "Not done yet," she whispered. And the apartment fell silent again, the little blue light still blinking in the dark. The courthouse felt colder that morning, as though the walls themselves anticipated the storm. Evelyn sat straight-backed in the witness chair, a faint tremor in her hands masked by the steady grip of her cane resting across her lap. The air buzzed with quiet tension, the scrape of pens, the shuffle of papers, the click of cameras somewhere beyond the double doors. At the defense table, Jenna Harris looked nothing like the woman from the glossy family photos that once filled Marcus's apartment. Her hair, usually immaculate, hung limp around her shoulders. She wore no pearls today, just a plain gray blazer that couldn't hide the exhaustion or fury etched into her face. Her attorney's chair beside her was empty. She had fired him that morning. "He doesn't know the truth," she'd snapped to the judge. "I'll speak for myself." Now, standing alone before the court, she looked less like a victim and more like someone who'd run out of disguises. Judge Hayward adjusted his glasses, his voice flat. "Ms. Harris, you've chosen to represent yourself. The court has advised against it. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" Jenna lifted her chin. "No one speaks for me better than me." "Very well." The judge turned to Reyes. "The witness is yours." Reyes nodded, standing with her quiet, lethal composure. "Mrs. Harris," she said, addressing Evelyn, "please tell the court what happened on October 17th at the Crown Heights Utica Avenue station." Evelyn began, her voice clear but deliberate. "I was waiting for the A train. Jenna was behind me. I felt a shove. Hard. I fell onto the tracks. Someone pulled me out before the train came." She paused, eyes flicking briefly toward Jenna. "When I looked up, she was standing there, watching." Reyes stepped aside, letting the silence fill the room. "And you're certain the defendant pushed you?" "I saw the footage," Evelyn said. "It wasn't an accident." Jenna's laugh broke the stillness, sharp, bitter. "You think that video shows everything? You've been twisting this story for months." The judge raised a hand. "You'll have your turn, Ms. Harris." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I don't need to twist the truth," she said. "It bends all by itself when it hits the light." Reyes hid a faint smile and sat down. No further questions. Judge Hayward turned. "Cross-examination, Ms. Harris?" Jenna rose slowly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. "Gladly." She took a few deliberate steps toward the stand. "Evelyn," she began, her tone dripping with feigned warmth, "you've always had a vivid imagination, haven't you? You were a teacher, used to telling stories." Evelyn said nothing. Jenna paced in front of the jury, her voice rising. "You've been painting me as a monster because you couldn't stand that Marcus chose me over you. Isn't that what this is really about? Jealousy?" Reyes started to object, but the judge gestured for Evelyn to answer. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "If you think surviving what you did to me was about jealousy, then maybe you don't understand love at all." A faint murmur rippled through the jury box. Jenna's jaw tightened. She turned toward them, gesturing wildly. "She's manipulating all of you. Look at her, she's performing." "Ms. Harris," the judge warned, "you will control yourself in this courtroom." But Jenna pressed on, voice cracking under its own heat. "She's obsessed with attention. That's why she's out there giving speeches, pretending to be some hero. She'll say anything to—" Reyes stood. "Your Honor? May I?" The judge sighed. "Briefly." Reyes walked forward, voice calm but edged. "Ms. Harris, you claim Mrs. Harris is lying for attention. And yet, in your recorded conversation, you said, quote, 'You're lucky, I didn't push harder.' Was that also her imagination?" Jenna froze. The color drained from her face. Reyes stepped closer. "Or when you wrote, 'You'll be next' from custody. Should we assume that too was a figment of her storytelling?" The silence hit hard. A few jurors shifted uncomfortably, scribbling notes. The judge adjusted his glasses again, expression carved in granite. "Answer the question, Ms. Harris." Jenna's lips parted, but no sound came. She turned toward the table, searching for words that weren't there. Reyes folded her arms. "No, further questions." The judge leaned back. "Jury will disregard the defendant's outburst and consider only the evidence." His voice dropped a note lower. "Though the evidence seems to speak for itself." A ripple of subdued whispers moved through the gallery. Betty leaned closer to Evelyn from her seat in the second row and whispered, "She's digging her own grave, honey. All you've got to do is watch." Evelyn kept her eyes on Jenna, who now sat at the defense table, trembling slightly as she flipped through her papers, pretending to find something, anything, that could undo what had just unraveled. But there was nothing left. Reyes gathered her notes, calm as ever, and sat back down. The judge called for a recess. The gavel struck once, sharp as the closing of a door. Evelyn exhaled slowly, rising with Betty's help. The air in the courtroom felt lighter now, but not safe. Not yet. As she stepped out into the hallway, her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. One new message. It was from an unknown number. Again. "You think it's over?" Evelyn stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then she deleted it without replying. "Not yet," she murmured to herself, voice steady as stone. "But it will be." And down the hall, the courtroom doors creaked open again, ready for the next round. The courtroom was airless, every sound sharpened by tension. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the shuffle of papers, even the faint creak of the jury box, all of it seemed louder under the weight of what was about to happen. Evelyn sat perfectly still beside Betty, her hands folded over her cane, her heartbeat steady but fierce. Jenna sat at the defense table, pale but defiant, her eyes darting between the judge and the jury like a cornered animal looking for a way out. The same gray blazer from earlier hung off her frame. The arrogance was gone now. Only the flicker of disbelief remained, as if she still thought she could talk her way free. Marcus sat several rows back, elbows on his knees, face hidden behind his hands. His presence felt like both penance and punishment. "Will the defendant please rise?" Judge Hayward said, his voice low and resonant. Jenna stood slowly, her hands trembling against the table. Evelyn could see her nails, bitten down to the quick. The jury filed in, 12 strangers carrying the weight of months of pain, lies, and survival. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a navy suit, held the verdict slip in shaking fingers. The silence was so complete that even the flick of the clerk's pen sounded like thunder. "Madam Foreperson," the judge said, "has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please hand the verdict to the clerk." The paper was passed, unfolded, and handed to the judge. A breath, a pause, the kind that splits time in two. The judge nodded once and returned the paper to the foreperson. "Please read the verdict aloud." The woman's voice wavered only on the first word. "On the charge of attempted murder in the second degree, we find the defendant, Jenna Harris." A pause. The air seemed to hold its breath. "Guilty." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Someone gasped softly. Betty's hand shot out, squeezing Evelyn's wrist, hard enough to hurt. The foreperson continued, her voice steadier now. "On the charge of witness intimidation, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty." By the time she finished, the words felt almost holy. Jenna's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the table, her voice breaking. "No, this isn't right." Her scream cut through the courtroom, raw and jagged. "You don't understand. She's lying. You're all blind." The bailiffs moved quickly, stepping closer, their faces expressionless. Judge Hayward banged his gavel once, the sound reverberating off the walls. "Order! Order in this courtroom!" Jenna's voice cracked into something small and desperate. "Marcus, please, tell them. Tell them she made you say those things." Marcus didn't move. He kept his head down, his shoulders shaking. Evelyn couldn't tell if he was praying or weeping. Maybe both. The judge's tone turned final, immovable. "The defendant will be remanded to custody pending sentencing. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell again, and just like that, it was over. For a moment, no one moved. The courtroom exhaled collectively. The jurors, the bailiffs, the reporters who'd been waiting for blood and found justice instead. Evelyn turned to Betty, her voice low, almost reverent. "Justice walks slow," she murmured. "But it walks." Betty smiled through tears. "You're damn right it does." Outside the courthouse, chaos awaited. The marble steps were a storm of microphones, camera flashes, and shouted questions. Evelyn blinked against the barrage of light, clutching her cane as reporters surged forward. "Mrs. Harris, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think your daughter-in-law's remorse was real? What message do you want this case to send?" Evelyn didn't stop walking. Reyes was beside her, shielding her from the press as best she could, one hand raised like a barrier. Evelyn's voice carried over the noise, clear, steady, unbroken. "It's not about me. It's about truth. And truth doesn't need to shout." The reporters called her name again, but she didn't turn back. Betty was already waiting at the bottom of the steps, holding Evelyn's coat out like a proud sentry. "Looks like you made the evening news," Betty said, grinning. Evelyn slipped the coat on, her expression unreadable. "Let them run the story. It's the ending she earned." But even as she spoke, a prickle ran down her spine, a sense of unfinished business, like a shadow that hadn't followed the rules of light. Reyes's phone buzzed in her pocket. She frowned, glancing at the screen. "That's odd," she said. "The DA's office just got a call from Rikers." Evelyn froze. "From Jenna?" Reyes nodded slowly. "Apparently she's asking for a visitor." "Who?" Reyes's brow furrowed. "She didn't say. Just one name on the list. Marcus Harris." Evelyn's pulse quickened, a coldness settling deep in her chest. "Carla," she said softly, her eyes narrowing. "Don't let him go." That night, the evening news replayed the verdict footage over and over. Evelyn stepping out of the courthouse, flashes lighting her face like a warning. But in her apartment, the sound was turned off. She sat in her armchair, cane resting by her knee, watching the closed captions scroll across the screen. Outside her window, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Brooklyn's night moved on, loud, restless, alive. But Evelyn didn't move. Her phone sat beside her, silent and still. She was waiting for Marcus to come home, for the next call, for whatever unfinished business the darkness still held. Because justice had finally walked, but Evelyn Harris knew better than anyone. Some ghosts follow the verdict home. The sentence came down on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind that carried the heaviness of rain even when it didn't fall. Evelyn sat in the front row again, cane by her knee, Betty beside her with a flask of coffee hidden in her purse. Jenna Harris stood at the defense table, her wrists cuffed, her face pale and hollow. The arrogance that once gleamed in her eyes had dulled into something brittle. Even the courtroom lights seemed to avoid her. Judge Hayward's tone was solemn but resolute. "Jenna Harris, the jury has found you guilty of attempted murder in the second degree, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. This court sentences you to 12 years in state prison. You will not be eligible for parole." A faint gasp rippled through the gallery. Evelyn watched without blinking as the bailiff stepped forward. Jenna didn't look at her, not once. Instead, she turned to Marcus, sitting near the aisle. "You could have saved me," she hissed. Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut. Marcus didn't respond. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, tears glinting at the corners of his eyes. When they led Jenna away, the heavy doors slammed behind her like punctuation, final, merciless. Evelyn exhaled. The sound came out like the wind leaving a storm. 2 weeks later, Evelyn sat across from her lawyer in a cramped office that smelled faintly of old paper and lemon disinfectant. "The civil countersuit's been dropped," the lawyer said, flipping through documents. "The judge ruled in your favor, and there's a settlement." Evelyn blinked. "A settlement?" "Jenna's assets, joint accounts, her half of the house, car, everything liquidated as part of restitution. You're entitled to all of it." He slid the check across the desk. The number printed there made her stomach twist. "I don't want it," she said immediately. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "It's yours by law." Evelyn stared at the check. It looked sterile, almost obscene, numbers without meaning. She tried to end my life. I won't live off the wreckage she built. That night, she wrote a single letter and enclosed the check. The next morning, it was sent to the Brooklyn Transit Victims Fund. In the memo line, she wrote only 2 words: ingratitude. Marcus came by every weekend after that. He painted her living room first, soft sage green. Something new, he said. Together they boxed up the old curtains, the faded photos, the reminders of years that had soured. Evelyn let him take the lead, watching him move with a quiet diligence she hadn't seen in years. There was a peace in it, even if fragile. When they were done, he stood in the doorway, paint on his forearms and a tired smile on his face. "Looks like a new place," he said. "It feels like one," she replied. He hesitated, then added, "I'm proud of you, Mom." She smiled gently. "You finally see me clearly." Marcus nodded, the weight between them dissolving into something almost tender. "Yeah," he said, "I do." On a crisp Friday afternoon, Adia Carla Reyes stopped by, bouquet in hand, white tulips and blue hydrangeas. "From the DA's office," she said. "A thank you for surviving with more grace than half our staff." Evelyn chuckled softly. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Reyes set the flowers on the table, glancing around the freshly painted apartment. "You've done well for yourself. Clean slate?" Evelyn motioned to the wall near her dining nook, where a new frame hung. The official State of New York vs. Jenna Harris verdict, encased in glass. "I don't believe in clean slates," she said. "I believe in earned ones." Reyes smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You earned yours 10 times over." As she turned to leave, Evelyn stopped her. "Carla, thank you for fighting when no one else would." Reyes nodded. "You gave me reason to." When the door closed, Evelyn sat in her armchair and looked around. The apartment felt brighter, calmer. Even the city noise outside seemed softer, as if Brooklyn itself had exhaled with her. That evening, a letter arrived. Official seal. Stamped and formal. She assumed it was paperwork from the fund until she noticed the return address: Greenhaven Correctional Facility. Her stomach went cold. She tore it open with careful fingers. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed words. Clinical in their precision. Notice of appeal. Defendant, Jenna Harris. Basis: newly claimed mental instability at time of incident. Motion for retrial pending psychiatric evaluation and review. Evelyn read it twice before lowering the page. Her pulse was steady, but her chest felt heavy, full of something that wasn't fear so much as fatigue. She rose, crossed to the wall, and looked at the framed verdict again. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass. Older, harder, but unbroken. The phone rang. It was Betty. "Did you hear the news? They're saying she's appealing." "I just got the letter," Evelyn said quietly. "What are you going to do?" Evelyn's voice was calm. "Same thing I've done since the day she pushed me." A pause. "What's that?" "Stand my ground." She hung up and turned back to the window. The city lights flickered across the glass, dancing over her reflection like small, restless ghosts. Then, without hesitation, she took the appeal letter, folded it once, and pinned it beside the framed verdict, side by side. Because justice, she thought, wasn't a destination, it was a vigilance. And as she whispered into the quiet, "Let her try," the faintest smile curved her lips. The morning of the appeal hearing, Evelyn didn't bother putting on real shoes. She watched from her living room, flannel robe, cane leaned against the arm of her chair, coffee cooling beside her. On the TV, the seal of the state of New York filled the screen, sterile and formal, followed by the split view of the virtual courtroom. One window for the judge, one for ADA Carla Reyes, and one for the defense counsel representing Jenna Harris. Evelyn's apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the radiator. Betty sat next to her on the couch, already muttering under her breath. "I swear, if they buy this insanity garbage, I'll throw my remote through that screen." Evelyn's lips quirked. "Save your strength. She's run out of tricks." On the television, the judge appeared. An older man with silver hair and a stare sharp enough to cut through stone. "This appeal hearing is now in session," he said. "We are here to review the motion filed by the defense in State of New York versus Jenna Harris, claiming mental instability at the time of the crime. Counsel, you may proceed." Jenna wasn't physically there, just a dim, grainy feed from Green Haven Correctional Facility. She sat behind a steel table, orange jumpsuit pressed, her hair pulled back in a bun. Even pixelated, Evelyn could see it, the flicker of calculation behind her eyes. Her new attorney began. "Your Honor, my client suffered from severe emotional distress and psychotic breaks stemming from unresolved grief and—" Reyes cut in, calm but ice-edged. "Emotional distress does not justify attempted murder, Your Honor, nor does it explain the coordinated efforts Mrs. Harris undertook to falsify evidence, intimidate witnesses, and harass the victim post-conviction." The defense lawyer tried to interject, but Reyes was already moving, every word measured like a chess move. "We have medical evaluations from 3 independent psychiatrists confirming no prior diagnosis of psychosis. What we do have," she said, clicking a remote, "is a pattern." The video, playback appeared. Jenna at the subway platform. The shove. The chaos. The same frame Evelyn had seen 100 times, but this time it looked almost quiet. Final. Reyes's voice didn't waver. "Intent is not a delusion, it's a decision." Even the defense attorney fell silent. The judge peered over his glasses. "Ms. Reyes, are you stating for the record that the defendant's behavior during and after incarceration demonstrates continued intent?" "Yes, Your Honor, including the handwritten threat sent to Mrs. Harris while in custody." Betty muttered, "Boom," under her breath. Evelyn's pulse quickened, but she didn't take her eyes off the screen. Reyes continued, laying out her case like a slow, unspooling fuse. Calm, methodical, lethal. "This is not a woman suffering from instability. This is a woman suffering from consequence, and she's still trying to rewrite her story to escape it." The judge leaned back, silent for a long moment. The courtroom feed froze briefly, Reyes mid-turn, Jenna's face a blur of fury. Then it resumed with the judge's voice steady and final. "The defense's motion for retrial on the grounds of mental instability is hereby denied." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "This case," the judge said, "is closed." For a heartbeat, the apartment was completely still. Then Betty whooped so loud she startled Evelyn's cat off the windowsill. "Yes, I knew it. You can't fake crazy and evil, it's one or the other." Evelyn laughed, a sound that broke free like something she'd been holding in for months. The kind that made her shoulders loosen and her chest finally open. She hadn't realized how long she'd been waiting to exhale. She reached for the remote and muted the feed, just as the screen showed Jenna being led out of the prison conference room, shouting soundlessly at her guards. Evelyn watched her disappear off screen, the image dissolving to static. That was the last time she ever saw her. That evening, Betty came back with a bottle of cheap champagne from the bodega on the corner. She poured it into paper cups because Evelyn's wine glasses had long since been retired. "To you," Betty said, raising hers, "the toughest woman in Brooklyn. And to justice that doesn't need to shout." Evelyn clinked her cup against hers. "And to friends who don't let you face the storm alone." They drank, bubbles tickling her throat. For the first time, the sound of laughter filled the apartment without tension behind it. Marcus arrived an hour later, his coat dusted with the faintest trace of snow. He stepped inside, eyes bright for the first time in months. "It's official," he said, holding up his phone. "No retrial, no appeal, no parole." Evelyn smiled. "I heard." He dropped onto the couch, the exhaustion leaving his face. "Listen to this," he said, scrolling through his phone. "Brooklyn survivor becomes advocate. Evelyn's. Harris's case sparks citywide reform proposal for transit safety. You're famous now." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I'm old, not famous." Betty snorted. "You're both." Marcus read on. Harris, who donated her entire settlement to the Brooklyn Transit Victims Fund, continues to speak publicly on safety and accountability. He looked up. "You changed something, Mom." Evelyn's eyes softened. "No, I just refused to stay silent." Later that night, after the others left, Evelyn sat alone in the quiet glow of her living room. The verdict frame and the pinned appeal letter hung side by side on the wall, proof that some battles didn't just end, they were survived. Outside, snow began to fall in slow, lazy flakes, dusting the fire escapes and the street below. The city's noise dulled into something gentle, almost forgiving. She lifted her paper cup, now half empty, and whispered to herself, "It's over." And for once, she believed it. The rotunda of the New York State Capitol shimmered with polished marble and camera lights. Rows of chairs filled the grand hall, each one occupied by lawmakers, transit officials, journalists, and survivors like her. Evelyn stood behind the podium, her cane resting discreetly at her side, the microphone adjusted just below her chin. It had been a year since the verdict, 12 months since the word guilty cracked open the silence that Jenna Harris had built around her. The applause that greeted Evelyn now felt surreal, deafening, warm, and genuine. She didn't need to speak yet. The crowd was already on her side. Governor Thomas Langford stood to her right, his voice carrying easily through the marble dome. "Today we honor a woman who reminded this city that justice doesn't have an expiration date," he said, gesturing toward her. "Evelyn Harris's courage pushed us to implement platform safety legislation that will protect millions of New Yorkers every year." The applause swelled again, echoing like thunder. Cameras flashed. Evelyn blinked against the light, but there was no fear in her eyes, only clarity. When the governor stepped aside, she moved to the microphone. "Thank you," she began softly. "When I stood on that platform a year ago, I didn't know if I'd ever walk again. I didn't know if I'd ever trust the world to hold me steady." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "But I learned something. Strength doesn't come from standing tall. It comes from standing back up." The audience was still, hanging on her every word. "I'm not here because I was pushed. I'm here because I refuse to stay down. For every person who's ever been told to let it go, for every victim whose story was doubted or dismissed, this fight is for you." Her voice trembled just slightly, not from nerves, but from conviction. "And maybe," she said, glancing toward the cameras, "the next time someone falls on those tracks, it'll be sensors and barriers that pull them back up instead of strangers with brave hands." Applause broke like a wave, long and roaring. The governor nodded from the sidelines, clapping with the rest. In the front row, Marcus sat straight, chin lifted, pride softening his features. He caught her eye, and in that brief exchange, everything unspoken between them, years of pain, distance, reconciliation, was forgiven. An hour later, the summit's bustle melted into the hum of Albany's afternoon. Evelyn found herself outside with Betty, whose camera was already out. "I told you you'd upstage the governor," Betty teased, snapping a photo as Evelyn tried to wave her off. "He's the one who signed the bill," Evelyn said. "I just lit the fire under him." "Exactly," Betty replied, looping her arm through Evelyn's. "Now come on. I've been dying to see if you can actually ride the subway without glaring at it like it owes you an apology. The Albany terminal was quieter than Brooklyn's stations, cleaner too, but the scent of metal and motion still hung thick in the air. The sound of distant brakes and the rush of air down the tunnel stirred something in Evelyn's chest. Not fear, something closer to reverence. She and Betty stepped onto the platform together. A digital display blinked. A train to Manhattan. 3 minutes. You sure about this? Betty asked gently. Evelyn nodded. I need to see it through. When the train arrived, the doors slid open with their familiar chime. Evelyn stepped in first, gripping the pole beside the door. Betty followed, muttering, Well, look at us. Rebels with senior discounts. The car was half full. Commuters staring at their phones, a young mother rocking a stroller, an MTA worker adjusting his cap. Life moving forward, indifferent and unstoppable. Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window opposite her, where her reflection stared back. Lined but unbowed, eyes steady. The train lurched forward, the rhythm of the tracks pulsing beneath her feet. Her reflection trembled in sync with it. She reached up and wrapped her fingers around the rail. Her knuckles didn't whiten this time. Her breath didn't hitch. She just stood there, balanced, calm, alive. Betty nudged her. Feels different now, doesn't it? Evelyn smiled faintly. Completely. They rode in silence for a few stops, the city flashing past in streaks of light and shadow. When the intercom chimed, next stop, Crown Heights, Utica Avenue, Evelyn's fingers tightened gently around the rail, her stop. As the doors opened, the same metallic wind from a year ago swept through the car. She looked at the yellow edge of the platform, bright and newly painted, and stepped forward without hesitation. Outside, the world felt wide again. Betty caught up beside her, breathless. You all right? Evelyn turned, her smile small but certain. I'm more than all right. She looked once more at the tracks below, the space that had almost claimed her, and then lifted her chin toward the station's exit where sunlight streamed down the stairwell like a promise. She pushed me toward death, Evelyn said quietly, her voice firm as steel. But I pushed back toward justice. She pushed me toward death, but I pushed back toward justice.